Welcome back, everyone. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN. Thank you. This is episode number 20. In today's show, we got a couple of things to go over. I'm going to go over my top 5 and worst 5 NBA rankings as of today. Today is November 16th in the morning. So this is before the November 16th games. And then, of course, we're going to get into my picks for tomorrow. That includes my pick 3, my lock of the week, and my underdog pick of the week. So let's get into it. Okay, so to start, for my NBA top 5 and worst 5 rankings as of November 16th. So, of course, at number 1, we got to go with the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're the only undefeated team still in the league. And they're not just beating terrible teams. They've had great wins over some of the other top teams, including a team that is also in the top 5. So, Cleveland has really surprised people. It's funny because last year, when they put this team together, a lot of people thought that they had the potential of being a really good team. And considering they have all the aspects that you look for in a team, they have size, they have deadly scoring, they have great ball handling. So this was kind of expected last year, but it didn't really live up to expectation. This year it seems like they've really molded into form, and they definitely deserve this top spot. They have a huge game coming up next Tuesday against Boston, which will really determine where they land in the upper echelon of good teams. That game will be a real test and kind of shed real light on where this team stands and what we can expect from them going forward. At number 2, surprisingly, got to go with the Golden State Warriors. Now, if you recall from my first top 5 and worst 5 earlier in the season, which was about a couple weeks ago, Golden State was not in my top 5, but they definitely have earned their way into the top 5. They've had a lot of really close games against tough teams, and they've won most of them, including playing 2 of the other top 5 teams and beating them. And they have 3 games against some of the other top 5 teams, and they're 2-1 in those games. So they definitely deserve to be in this spot at number 2. They had a huge game just a couple games ago against Dallas that saw Klay Thompson come back to Golden State for the first time. And it was a huge ovation for Klay. The crowd was great. The staff in the stadium was great, greeting him, kind of letting him know that he was appreciated for his time in Golden State. And then what made things even better is that Klay played great. I believe he hit 6 threes in that game. And then Steph finished him off, hit him with the sleepy time celebration, and got the win. So Golden State really seems to be clicking into form. Buddy Hield is really surprising folks, showing that he's, at least in today's game, he's just as good as a shooter as Klay Thompson is. So they haven't really missed out on Klay not being there anymore. And Golden State looks like they're definitely getting back in the mix of another championship contender. At number 3, we got to go with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, OKC was in my original top 5. They were number 2 before. Actually, I believe I had them at number 1, but that was back when they were still undefeated. They have had 2 losses since, and one of them was to the number 2 team, the Golden State Warriors. But nonetheless, they still have a good record. They're currently 11-2. They definitely showing to be a complete team. It is unfortunate that they did suffer a huge injury with Chet Holmgren. He injured his hip. I believe he's supposed to be out maybe a couple months. So that is going to be a downer. They are expecting to get Hardenstein in sometime soon. So that'll be a plus to kind of get somebody in with size. But nonetheless, they still have been playing good with Chet being out. They have the largest point differential out of any team in the league right now, and they're number 1 in scoring defense, which is not something that you necessarily expect from a team that has a lot of young guard play. They play with a decent tempo and other than Chet, they don't really have a lot of size. So the fact that they're number one in points allowed, meaning least amount of points allowed, with that type of construction of a team is really great. And that's why they're in the number 3 spot right now. At number 4, obviously we got to go with the defending champs, the Boston Celtics. The Boston Celtics right now are 10-3, and they're currently tied for second in most points per game, which makes sense considering they have scorers all over the court. Remember, they had 3 people from their team that went to the Olympics represented USA on the Olympic team, and probably should have had 4. So Jaylen Brown, of course, was one of the ones that didn't make it, but is a player that can give you 40 on any given night. So Boston has pretty much flexed their muscle throughout the year. They did have a close loss to the Warriors, which is why the Warriors are ahead of them, but still a great record, still showing that they can be dominant, still putting up points essentially in every game. So they deserve to be in that number 4 spot. And then at number 5, I'm going to go with the Denver Nuggets. Now, I went back and forth with this 5th spot. A couple other teams I was considering was the Houston Rockets and the LA Lakers. But when it comes down to it, I just feel like if these teams played each other right now, I'd still slightly give the edge to Denver. Now, Denver did just lose last night, but it was mainly because Joker didn't play. I believe he had some personal reason. Also, the head coach, Malone, was not at the game because I believe he went to see his daughter play in a college game that she's in. So without your head coach and your best player, it makes sense that they would lose. I believe they lost to the Pelicans. But nonetheless, when fully healthy, they do look like a top 5 team. So right now I'm putting them at 5. Their current record is 7-4. But yeah, had Joker been playing, it would have been 8-3. So right in line with the other top 5 teams in terms of record. So they deserve to be in that number 5th spot right now. Now for the worst 5. At 26, I got to go with the Charlotte Hornets. The Hornets right now are 4-7. Again, another team that has a couple players here and there. Not really much expected from Charlotte. Hasn't been much expected from Charlotte since the 90s, honestly. They are the 6th worst team in scoring right now. So when you don't excel in depth on your team and you just have a couple of people who will really get you buckets consistently, it really shows, which is why they're that close to the bottom in scoring. And that's why they're in the 26th spot in this worst 5 ranking. At 27, I got to go with the New Orleans Pelicans. They are currently 4-9. Yes, they did get a win last night, but again, I mentioned that when I was talking about Denver, they only got the win because Joker and Malone were not there. Now, before that game last night, they had lost 5 straight, so they've definitely been on a skid, trying to get it back together. I actually expected this team to go to the playoffs. Part of why I expected that is because I expected Zion to play more games. I don't know why I thought that. He definitely has a track record of missing a huge chunk of games in every single season, but I was trying to be optimistic. Doesn't look good for them now. We'll see how things change going forward. At 28, I got to go with the Philadelphia 76ers. 76ers right now are 2-10. Now, yes, the biggest part of that is their injuries. They're one of the teams that I predicted before the season would be in that 4th or 5th seed going into the playoffs. And the reason why I said that was because I felt like injuries were going to hold them back, and I felt like they were going to make a late charge. But the injuries have pretty much gotten the best of them. Of course, Embiid missed, I believe, the first 6 games due to injury, so to speak. And then he was suspended for 3 games, so he missed the first 9 games. Then he came back. Then, of course, when he came back, Maxey got hurt. So they've just been a roller coaster of injuries. They haven't been able to put the whole team together, and it shows why they only have 2 wins on the season. it doesn't look good for him now, especially even though Paul George has been playing pretty good. He also has an injury history, so if this is what the whole season's going to be like, this is going to be disastrous and probably the most disappointing team of the year. In the 29 spot, though, I got to go with the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors right now are 2-11. They're currently on a 6-game losing streak. It's not looking good for Toronto. They were also one of those teams that were in my bottom 5 in the last NBA top 5 and worst 5. Nothing has improved. Again, like I said, they've only had 2 wins on the season. They did recently have a huge event where they retired Vince Carter's jersey, so that was nice. They did have Drake in attendance, and that game happened to be against Sacramento, which of course had DeMar DeRozan on the court. And there's this whole beef because DeMar and Drake were supposed to be friends when they were in Toronto, but then DeMar was in the Kendrick Lamar video, so I guess they're beefing now. And Drake spent majority of the game on the sideline standing up, trying to basically look intimidating, I guess. And he made a statement after the game saying something about if they ever try to put DeMar DeRozan's jersey in the rafters, that he'd climb up there himself and rip it down, which is ridiculous. So, but that's essentially the gist of the only positive or entertaining news that's been going on with Toronto. As far as play on the court, they have not looked impressive at all, and that's why they're in the 29 spot. But they're not last. In 30th, we got to go with the Washington Wizards. Now, the Wizards are 2-9, so yes, technically they have a better record than Toronto, who's 2-11. But it's only a matter of time. I don't expect them to get a win in the next 2 games, so they end up with the same record anyway. The Wizards right now have the worst point differential in the entire league. They've also given up the most points allowed. If you recall, in my last top 5 and worst 5, that was the case back then. It's still been the case now, even though it's been about 2 weeks since that ranking. So Washington continuing on the same path that we've kind of expected. Their organization as a whole has just been in shambles for years, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any better anytime soon. All right, so now we got to get into my NFL picks for tomorrow. Of course, to start, we got to get with my pick 3. Now, the first game in my pick 3 I'm going to go with is the Los Angeles Rams to beat the New England Patriots. The Rams right now are favored to win by 4.5. Now, this game I think will be a close game. I don't know if the Rams will cover the spread. If I had to take a guess, I would say they will, just because I think it'll be one of those late game situations where they score a touchdown to go over that 4.5 spread. Now, coming into this season, this line probably would have been expected to be like 7.5, 8, because the firepower that the Rams have on offense with the young development team of the Patriots, you would expect that the Rams should be dominant. But the Rams, were dealing with injury earlier. Now people are mostly healthy, but they haven't looked their best yet. And New England has looked a lot better than expected. Drake May has looked beyond, I think, what they could have expected from a rookie quarterback. And he looks very impressive. Definitely, I think they're comfortable saying that they found their future quarterback, which is great. So I do think that it will be a close game until the end, and then I think the Rams will pull it away. I think Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua will continue to have big games as usual, and the Rams will pull off the win. Now, for the second game in my pick 3, I'm going with the Minnesota Vikings to beat the Tennessee Titans on the road. The Minnesota Vikings are favored to win by 6 points. Now, Minnesota is coming off of a really tough win against Jacksonville where they did not look their best. They only won by 5 points. And Jacksonville and Tennessee are essentially around the same caliber of team. Tennessee, I would say, has a much better defense, though. But Jacksonville had a better offense. So we'll see how that looks. I think with Tennessee's limited offense, though, and the way Minnesota's defense flies around, I feel like Tennessee is going to have a hard time scoring. I think this game is actually going to be a low-scoring game, considering how Minnesota's offense has looked recently. I expected Minnesota to score a lot against Jacksonville last week, and they didn't. Tennessee's defense is a lot better. And Minnesota is on the road. So, yes, I think that I expect Minnesota to score more than 12 points that they scored last week, but I don't expect them to score like in the 30s. And I do expect that their defense will hold Tennessee under 14 for the entire game. So it'll be a decent game. I will predict that they'll cover the spread, but more importantly, I'm predicting that they win the game. And the last game in my pick three, I'm going with the Green Bay Packers to beat the Chicago Bears on the road. Green Bay is favored to win by 5 points. Now, it's a little daunting that all of my picks are road teams. Typically, that doesn't spell for good outcome, but I think each of these teams will be able to get it done on the road. In terms of Green Bay, they pretty much own the Bears. The Bears have been falling apart recently with their coaching situation. I believe they just fired their offensive coordinator. Caleb Williams has seemed to regress in the last 2 to 3 weeks. I don't think that this game will be any different. Green Bay recently had their bye, so they're back to being healthy and playing strong. And like I said, the Packers own this rivalry. I don't think this will be anything different. I think Chicago's offensive struggles will continue and Green Bay will win, and I'm predicting they'll also cover the 5-point spread. All right, so now we got to get into my lock of the week. This week's lock of the week is the Detroit Lions beating the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are at home, and this is the biggest spread of the season so far. Detroit is favored to win by 14 points. If you're a Jacksonville fan, you got to be pretty much feeling disrespected. 14 points is huge, 2 touchdowns. Granted, Detroit is at home. And honestly, I think if the spread was 17, I'd probably still say Detroit to cover the spread. So, yeah, I think Detroit will cover the spread even with it being at 14. I think it's just a bad mismatch, especially after the way Jacksonville's offense looked last week. Now, I do think Minnesota's defense is better than Detroit's defense, but I think Detroit's defense is good enough. They did get Zadarius Smith back in the mix this week, so he should be playing his first game as a Detroit Lion. It's going to be at home, so the crowd is going to welcome him with open arms. He'll get a huge ovation, which will probably help him get after Jacksonville. Also, Mac Jones, I believe, is going to be starting for Jacksonville in this game, which is another reason why I think the spread is so high. I think Detroit dominates this game from start to finish, and they do what they've been doing all year long. Now for my underdog pick of the week. Now, the underdog pick of the week is really tough. There are, I think, 4 or 5 games that have a larger than 3.5 point spread. Most of the games I feel like have no chance of their underdog of winning the game. So the game that I landed on as my underdog pick of the week is the Indianapolis Colts. They're going on the road to play the New York Jets. Now, the Jets are favored to win by 4 points. I think the Jets should win this game. But I think out of all the games where an underdog is favored to lose by more than 3 points, the Colts have the best chance to win. Obviously, Joe Flacco is now being benched, and so they've put Anthony Richardson back in the starting position. And you just never know. You know, if you look at the tape of Anthony Richardson's last games, they're from a few weeks ago. Hopefully he's improved in that time. And watching Joe Flacco operate the offense, hopefully he's kind of got it together. He's been saying the right things in his press conferences this week, saying that he really learned and understand what it is to be the leader of the team. So we'll see if that translates on the field. I think with his explosive arm and explosive running ability, anything is possible. The Jets defense has definitely been looking underwhelming this season, so I think this is the best chance of an underdog of that magnitude getting it done. So I am taking the Colts as my underdog pick of the week. All right, so that's it for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to speaking with you in the next episode. Peace.